Awesome. Again, yeah, thanks. Great to see everyone here. It's great to see there's a full day track just on international markets. As I'll touch on here, they're of great importance now, especially immediately and definitely going into long term. So present a pretty significant amount of information here, especially considering it's pretty early in the morning. Again, they record the session, so don't worry about taking notes. If it's really relevant to you, it'll be online afterwards. So just quickly about myself, as probably mentioned, I'm a kind of independent consultant now, really focused on two areas. One is working with smaller to mid-size mobile game developers, helping them source strong partnerships to basically bring their games to the market in the West, and doing much more in Asia now, which is why I sort of have the knowledge around the area that we're talking about today, as well as working with developers, publishers, service providers around different business sort of areas as well. So my background, worked at 6 Waves, which was a game publisher focused on Facebook as well as mobile, launched many games from a wide variety of developers. Before that, worked at Electronic Arts. So today, just quickly, I'm going to cover sort of the market opportunity in the key markets in Asia, South Korea, China, and Japan. Touch on some of what I consider the sort of unique and very important distribution channels in these markets. And then just for the developers in the room, touching on kind of like, okay, well, why do I need a partner in these markets? What's the potential of my game in these markets? What things do I need to consider if I really want to explore these markets? Is it worthwhile for my game based on various factors? And then how to source and identify potential partners. So understanding the market opportunity. So I think as Pepe mentioned, not so long ago, it was kind of all about North America, Western market. But the reality is today, the market in Asia, depending on kind of what you define as Asia, is very significant. So whether these numbers are exactly right or not is kind of irrelevant, but in this this market research providers forecasts the North American market at $3 billion for mobile, and Asia Pacific, which in this scenario includes Australia, as well as mainland China, at $6 billion. So Asia Pacific, 400 million mobile gamers. Western market, or North America, around 150 million mobile gamers. So again, when we think about Asia, it's already very, very significant compared to the North American market. And it's, while they're both continuing to grow, it's already a decent amount ahead of us. So the first market, just to touch on, would be South Korea. So if you think about South Korea, it's very much dominated by Google Play and iTunes. They account for 80% of the market. If you just think about mobile content, so that's not just games, that's sort of all types of apps and entertainment and mobile content. So market estimate, $3 billion. Android is overwhelmingly sort of has the most penetration compared to iOS, so 90% penetration, so very much an Android country. So game revenue is heavily driven by games integrated to the KakaoTalk platform, and I'll touch on this very shortly if you're not familiar with it. So it's a social platform, mobile messaging platform. So if you I just looked at the top grossing games. I believe it was the top 25. 75% of them on Google Play and 50% on iOS are all integrated with this KakaoTalk platform. So it heavily dominates the market in terms of revenue and is kind of like the key discovery channel. There's other Android channels like the T-Store and Samsung App Store, but these are fairly incremental. Again, the market is dominated by the Google Play and iOS. So from the game developer's perspective, there's not a lot of local partners in this market, in my experience, that are looking for Western games. Basically, there really hasn't been any sort of breakout success for Western games in this market. Obviously, you have like the exceptions, like a Candy Crush or Clash of Clans, Boom Beach. But as I'll touch on later, there's very specific taste for users in this market in terms of game mechanics, as well as just visual style. So a Western game without pretty substantial work generally isn't going to resonate with these users. So thinking about the key markets that we work with here in the West, iTunes, Google Play. So this is just some data. There's no specific numbers here, but it just gives you a perspective. So blue is South Korea, black is United States. This is the monthly sort of App Store revenue from each country. So you can see that on the iOS side, as we mentioned before, since Android is fairly dominant, South Korea it's in the top 10 in terms of countries, in terms of total revenue, but it's versus the US, it's very small. Whereas Google Play, it's just right behind the United States, even for a country that's very, very small. So you can see how much revenue is being driven from this market, even though small user base. So I talked earlier about KakaoTalk. Just like for those who are not familiar, what is KakaoTalk? So it's a mobile messaging platform. It was launched in 2010, so it's not that old. The platform itself has about 145 million monthly active users. And there was just actually some article this week that said that there was now 20 million monthly active users across the network just playing games. So very significant. 93% penetration. So basically every single person in South Korea has KakaoTalk on their device, which is pretty amazing. In terms of thinking about Kakao and the Kakao games, it's actually the third largest publisher in revenue across the entire world. So EA, Supercell, that's not even necessarily games. So it's very significant in terms of the amount of revenue that it's generating. The games platform itself for Kakao grossed almost just over $500 million in just the first half of this year. There's over 520 games from over 200 developers integrated with the platform. So I think, as I touch on here at the bottom, the lifespan of the games on Kakao has sort of declined because of the amount of saturation of content, similar to the just iOS store. If you were early on in the store when it first launched, it was much easier to get discovered. Now with Kakao, everyone knows the potential. There's a ton of content on it, so it's much harder to get discovered by users. It's much more competitive. So both the potential of sort of explosive growth is lower, as well as just the potential of getting any level of users. So there's a lot of games that really don't see any growth, as well as sort of the lifespan. So it's kind of shoot up and then shoot down faster versus when it launched in 2010. And then one other thing to point out is KakaoTalk, while we're talking about South Korea, we'll touch on later with Line, which is traditionally in Japan. It's in 15 languages now. They're growing like crazy. The company's valuation, its valuation is massive. So they're very much focused on growth. So this is going to be something that's going to be impactful outside of this market. So Japan, some estimates around the market there is around 5 billion right now, which is half the total gaming industry overall, like any platform, PC, console. The growth is expected to be massive with the smartphone game market growing to 8 billion by 2016. So a lot of users in Japan are still using feature phones. So there's still a transition happening. Users in Japan are hungry for content on mobile. They used to monetize very well, even on the feature phone, which is like the old your Razor phone and stuff like that. They're playing on the subway and stuff like that. $5 per download. That's across free and paid apps in Japan. That's some data from App Annie or from Distimo. So of all if you divide all the downloads and all the revenue, you get $5, which is very significant considering most of the stuff now is free to play. So Japan is very much a local market still. So the top grossing charts are dominated by local developers, although some Western games have managed to break out again. Your Clash of Clans, Candy Crush, etc. Otherwise, most of them are all from Japanese developers. So again, a local sort of difference versus the Western market is like TV advertising is a huge part of marketing for mobile games. So Puzzles and Dragons, they're advertising on TV, and we're here. I would consider that very odd. When I think there's like Candy Crush ads, I was like on TV here in the U.S. I thought that was just wild, but for there, it's much more of a sort of standard channel. So of the 3 countries I'll talk about today, I consider this kind of the lowest potential market for Western games, just because the user tastes are very, very specific, and they don't. Most Western games, just the art style, don't necessarily resonate. And the other issue is that a lot of the larger companies in Japan that sort of partner on games generally are looking mostly to partner with other Japanese developers. So there's not a huge subset of companies that exist to publish Western games at this point. That's definitely improving, but it's still fairly limited in my experience. So again, market size. So iTunes, Japan is number 2 behind the United States, which is pretty amazing considering this size difference in the countries. Google Play, you can see that Japan is clearly number 1, significantly ahead of the United States. So, that's where you're seeing that like massive revenue per download numbers. So quickly touch on 2 channels that are unique to the market that I think are really interesting for developers. The one on the left is called the A Smart Pass from KDDI. So KDDI is like Verizon or AT&T. So they have this offering where you, for $5 a month, you pay this monthly subscription and you get access to 500 apps. And so these traditionally could be, premium apps, free apps, whatever it might be. It's definitely curated. Even as it grows, they kind of dump, ones that aren't performing when they add new ones. So it's always around 500. So it's not kind of overwhelming for users. About 25% of KDI's user base is a subscriber based on the latest numbers. So 10 million subscribers, only 2 years after launch, which is pretty impressive. And so the cool thing about this is that, we see a lot of times you have games that have a lot of installs and usage, say like Flappy Bird or something like that. But all they're showing is like Google, display. The cool thing about the A Smart Pass is that basically that $5 subscription fee, times the monthly subscription fee times 10 million subscribers, $50 million, goes into a pool of money. I'm not sure what proportion of that is doled out to developers, but they essentially allocate a portion of that $50 million every month to developers based on usage. So they don't specify exactly like how they define and calculate usage, but basically if you have a game that's very engaging, that might necessarily have like a strong free-to-play sort of monetization, there's a significant opportunity here for you. They also offer that IAP revenue as well, so there's that. So it's a very selective offering to get into. You basically, I won't say you have to, but in my experience, there's Japanese partners that will help you get into that process and get access to that. So that's a really unique thing that's very interesting to me. So on the right is Line. Line is another mobile messaging platform. So launched in 2011, 470 million registered users worldwide, 50 million in Japan. So one of the interesting things is Line is sort of known as like the sort of being the Japanese mobile messaging platform, but the reality is it's like very much diversified outside of that market, and it's growing significantly. So a lot of the growth is in Southeast Asia. The valuation of this is already at like a 10 billion, supposedly. So these companies are very well capitalized, like Line and Kakao, and they're going after these other markets, competing against each other to grow as fast as possible, and potentially using games to do that. Like here, I met the guys from Line that are focused on India, and they're looking for games to help engage users in India and grow the presence there. So the Line game platform is very, very selective compared to Kakao. There's 500 games. They have 50 games. They'll get rid of games that are recently. They got rid of a bunch of games. And revenues are very significant for them. 300 million downloads they've driven since July 2012. So the last market, China. So market size supposedly will be worth 1.5 to 2.5 billion by 2015. To me, that seems really low, but that's what the experts say. So that's what's in the presentation. So unique factors about China. There's no Google Play, essentially. Obviously, if you want to get access to it, you can, but it's blocked. So there's no Google Play in the market. So on the Android side, you have, say, 200 plus of these third-party Android channels, which I'll touch on a little bit, what that means. 200, 175, everyone throws out different numbers, but there's a lot of them. That's what's important. And that's, somewhere between 70 to 80% of the market opportunity in China in terms of revenue. And people will disagree around what percentage it is, and it depends on if you have a casual game or more, mid-core, hardcore game. But it's somewhere in that, it's definitely the majority of revenue still. So iOS, the opportunity continues to grow. So as we'll see in the next slide, like China is actually one of the biggest iOS markets already. And they only just officially got the iPhone earlier this year. So the potential there is massive. It's grown 200% from 2012 to 2013. I don't know what it's done from 2013 to 2040 yet, but I assume it's pretty fast growth. So again, this is sort of my perspective, but for Western developers in China, traditionally this is a very high potential market. You see all the top Western games partnering to go to China. Subway Surfers, Temple Run, Cut the Rope, Candy Crush is coming out. So Western games generally have of all the three markets, like as they sort of stand in the Western market without significant changes, in my opinion, they have the most potential going to China versus the other two markets without significant changes. Obviously, if you make changes, there's more potential upside for you. But what I've seen recently is that, and one other thing is there's a very competitive market for importing Western games. Very, very competitive. At this conference, there's probably 5 or 6 companies that have booths out. There's a bunch of other companies that aren't even here. So there's a lot of competition now from Chinese companies to import Western games. But one of the trends I'm seeing is that they're looking to get more games from like Korea and Japan because the gameplay is more advanced, more action in terms of the mid-core genre, deeper casual gaming experiences. So as I talk to more of the companies, they're kind of like, well, we're not as interested in Western games anymore. So that's an interesting trend. I think that'll change as Western developers' game mechanics get more advanced, et cetera. So quickly, App Store revenue. Obviously, there's no Google Play in China, so it's 0. For iTunes, as I mentioned, China is number 3. It's still significantly behind the US, but in terms of monthly revenue, it's number 3 behind of all the countries. And then growth is a huge thing in China, right? So now there's this opportunity now, but if you think about just really basic stat is like how many people are in China and how many smartphones are. This data is kind of old. It's from Flurry. It's from like 2013. But there's a huge, USA is on the left. We have a lot of devices and a lot of people, but they're pretty close together. China, that's really what people talk about China. It's about growth. So we'll see how that continues over the next few years. Channel overview, third-party Android ecosystem on the left. Again, hundreds of app stores, 70% of the market, very fragmented. So you have kind of some larger ones and then a very, very long tail where you can have like a ton of places have like 1% of the market, which can be very resource intensive to manage the relationships. There's consolidation though recently with acquisitions of some of the larger players, so that's improves things. These channels are distributing apps via primary businesses like search. They have traffic for search on mobile or security software, and then they're distributing apps as users within these other experiences. And the one unique thing is developers pay revenue share to both the distribution channel, where people are downloading the apps, and then the carriers do carrier billing. So you're actually giving away more revenue in this market versus the West, where you're just dealing with Apple or Google, who's distributing and doing the payment. The other thing is WeChat, mobile messaging platform from Tencent. It's massive, 400 million users. The revenue run rate is already over $1 billion for this year for the revenue just Tencent is getting from the games. After they pay out, they tend to take a larger share versus the other platforms. And then again, more than half the top grossing games are all on WeChat. So I only have a few minutes, so I'm just going to quickly go through some of this stuff. But okay, why do I need a partner? What's the potential for my game? How do I find a partner? So reasoning behind a partner, there's really in my opinion, 6 key things, not necessarily in order of importance, but just 6 things. So one is expertise in local marketing channels, online and offline. So I know in China, there's a lot of like offline marketing. Obviously, in Japan, we talk about TV. Access to local billing channels, which is very important for China on that third-party Android side. Being able to do carrier billing, that's how you're gonna make all your money, or majority of your money. Understanding the local market around monetization, minimizing the need for additional resources, so translation, customer support, marketing. You know, if you look at like all the top Western developers, there's basically none that bring, especially if you think about China, there's like none that bring their games over on their own. It's just too specific. And then access to the distribution channels that we touched on is important. And then managing piracy issues, which is really important to China. We talked about the user tastes, significantly different. So visual style, the game on the left is Korea, or top game from Korea, right is top game from Japan. Visual style is significantly different, so that can be limiting for the potential of your game if it doesn't sort of fit with the taste of the users. And then also game mechanics. So generally game mechanics in these markets, especially Korea and Japan, are much more advanced, or more advanced in the US. Deeper casual games, more skill-based gameplay, and mid-core titles. And then other issues potentially with appeal, thinking about the theme of your game. So theme, like topic, like something like if you had a pool game, like based on some work I was doing, like nobody's likes pool in these markets. So IP is a huge issue. We've seen significant variations even between these different countries in terms of what's familiar to people and what's not. And then game mechanics, for example, like even if you were using a game that uses some kind of a slot machine mechanic, because gambling is basically illegal in China, like most users aren't even familiar with what that mechanic is. So you have to understand and talk to people and understand like what is the potential based on the key game mechanics and the theme, the topic of my game. Social integration. So for example, it can help or hurt you. In Korea, there's like heavy interest in games that are very focused on social and platform integration. Whereas in China, there's no dominant sort of social network at this point, like Facebook. So if your game is like heavily dependent on Facebook for virality engagement, you're going to have a lot of trouble because there's nothing that exists that's that scale. And then some specifics of China, monetization generally needs to be much more aggressive. And that's where you work with a local partner, figure out what does that mean? How do I make my monetization more aggressive? Performance on lower end Android devices. So the market there, the majority of devices are lower end. And that means if I have a game that's using like Unreal or a game that demands like significant memory, like that's going to be a huge issue for reaching a mass audience. As well, data usage is a huge issue. So the majority of users in China still on slower internet that has very low limits. So if your game is a large binary or uses a lot of data over time, you're going to have significant issues getting traction. So how do I find partners? Just quickly, as I touched on, more presence at the shows, Casual Connect GDC, just going to those, setting up meetings. If you're really proactive, you're going to go to China, Korea, Japan, go to the key shows, find these local partners, meet with them. Referrals to me is the most important, especially for Western developers. Finding developers that have worked with partners in these markets and getting referrals and whatnot. And then following the blogs to find out kind of the new companies as well. So in my opinion, the most important things, reputation. Foreign market, you're unfamiliar. You want somebody that's worked with Western developers successfully and has successfully launched games. What are the games that you publish? How successful have they been? And then understand how are they going to distribute your game in these local markets. Do they have access to these channels that I talked about? What are they going to do to actually get your game out in the market? Cool. So sorry the end was a little bit rushed, but I promised to cover a bunch of topics and try to squeeze it in to 20 minutes. So, awesome.
Thank you. Thank you, Josh. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Hey, Josh. Thanks a lot. So I guess the question I have is, you talked about a lot of fragmentation with the various app stores in China. Can you give us an idea of maybe the top 3, 4 Android stores?
Yeah, so 360, Baidu, SnapP, and That's SnapP. And then I can't remember the other one that I had on here. Account for like probably like over 50% of the market.
How do HTML5 games on WeChat monetize?
No idea.
Is there
So I
rev
know
share
that
on
they're
ads? Yeah.
what?
Is it a rev share on ads or
Oh, games on WeChat?
on WeChat?
Yeah, so
HTML5
WeChat,
ones?
so games on WeChat are native apps. So basically, you're monetizing the same as you would in any other native app through in-app purchase. They're just integrated with the social infrastructure.
Got it.
So they're doing some interesting things in China with HTML5 games that you can play in the actual messaging app within the messaging app, but that's I think farther out.
We have one more question, real quick.
I'll stick around if you want to ask me questions too.
What is the scope for casino games in the Asian markets, and are there any legal restrictions which will prevent their growth?
Yes, definitely. So I'm actually not as aware of the potential in Japan and Korea. I know for China, basically, it's a huge issue still. So I in touch with one of the companies that was going to bring one of the largest social casino games, and it will not come out anytime soon. So even though again, users aren't familiar with gambling because unless you're going to like Macau or you're like the wealthier folks, you've never played those slot machines or a lot of these games. And two, it's a gray area with the government regulation, I think. So maybe soon, but at this point, from what I've heard, not going to happen for a little while. Cool. All right. Thanks very much.